Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about managing and development. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how can I manage joint application development? And basically the story behind this was that we have this person who needs to manage two different teams. They need to collaborate on a deliverable, and he was just wondering how I would approach that problem. And the short answer is that you need to very clearly define the responsibility area of each team, and you need to make sure that you have a very collaborative environment between these two teams. That's pretty much the way that I've at least solved this problem in the past. So what I mean by this is that when you have two independent teams that don't really work with each other, it can be two different companies or they can be in the same company, it doesn't really matter all that much. What the first thing you want to do as quickly as possible is to agree with both sides on the terms of engagement. They need to know what the vision is. You really need to show what it is that everybody's building. You need to be super clear about that. And you as the manager, you need to make it super clear that you take full responsibility for having the last opinion about certain things, because some things are almost impossible for a team of people to actually settle on. One example of such a thing is, say, documentation. Documentation is one of the hardest things to deliver because everybody wants to use different, like if you have if 3 people review the same documentation, each person will try to say, oh no, we should use these words, no, it should say that, it should say that, it should say that. They can never agree, especially when there's 2 teams, on what's actually what. So that means that you need some type of leader person that just has final say and says, all right, I'm responsible now for making sure that we are being consistent. You do your thing, like you're doing the work that I've told you to do, and you're doing the work that I told you to do, and we collaborate together, but I am the one who is responsible for having like the eagle-eye perspective and make sure that everything stays consistent. And that's where the alignment part of being a manager in this sort of situation comes, where you need to make sure that you clearly communicate the responsibility of each team and that you expect them to align with certain things. You give them guidelines for what you need. You don't need to micromanage. It's more about giving guidelines for how we're going to do this. And then create a very clear schedule. Like they need to really know that, okay, so we're going to build this part, this part, this part, this part, etc., etc. And apart from that, it's extremely important, at least this is not always the case. If you can achieve this, it is the best thing possible for you, but it's sometimes not possible depending on how the architecture of your system works and how the teams are actually, what their responsibility areas are. Ideally, you want each of the teams to be you want to have a very loose coupling. The less interactions you have between the teams, the better. And I'm not talking socially here, I'm talking technically. If their boundaries are very well defined, that let's say this is one of the reasons why microservices is like a popular concept, because they solve this sort of problem extremely well. So you have one team that is responsible for a few services that do some part of the thing of the system, and another team that has another part of the system. But if they're both sharing the same code base, or there's a lot of connections between the two, that's not an ideal situation, because the more interconnections the code has to each team's responsibility area, the more they're going to get in each other's way. So the best thing for you is if you can scope the responsibility of each team so that they don't have to interact technically as much. That's the best way I can describe it. It's one of the reasons why you don't work at large scale with a monolithic application, because you might have hundreds of developers from different teams that all touch the same code. And if I'm working on the same code as somebody else and I'm adding my features and they're adding their features, there's going to be a bunch of conflicts and all of this overhead process that needs to be sorted out, and regressions and bugs and all this bullshit. So if you can scope it, as I prefer to say, at the feature level, that's the best part. That's a very nice split where, okay, so we need a bunch of features delivered for this big project. You are responsible for those features and you are responsible for those features, and there shouldn't be all that much overlap between the two. We both need you to work to do your part, but you don't have to, do daily stand-ups and synchronize on what stories you are working on a daily basis, right? And then you need to have like a check-in, like a very depending on how big the project is, you should have a very regular schedule where you check in. I prefer, I mean, for me, it's an arbitrary thing, but usually once a month or once a week, I mean, is a very good measurement. Even maybe twice a week, depending on how close you want that collaboration to be. Once you have that, the social interaction comes into play, and that is that it's vital for you to get a feel for if both teams have the same priorities. And this is a hard thing sometimes, because even, I mean, in a perfect world, each team can focus on just this big project, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you have managers who, management comes in and they say, okay, we really need you to deliver this. And then the team says, well, but we're working on this, and that's really important as well. And the management goes, oh shit, yeah, we need that too. You need to do both. You have to do both. We split it. Okay, so you have some people in your team do that, and you have some people to do that. Okay, that's what we're going to do, because for some reason we can't prioritize. And when that's a very likely scenario. So you need, as the person who is responsible for aligning these two teams, you really need to get to know the manager or the team leads or the team, like to get their pulse, like know these people well, like have a good social interaction with them, so that you know where their priorities are. Like empathize with them, understand their situation, and make sure that they understand in turn how important being part of this alignment situation actually is, because it is. If they don't feel a shared sensation of ownership, it's going to be very likely that there's going to be either problems on the sides, like miscommunications, or like hostile, like passive aggressiveness or something. Like they might not work so well together. And that's the most important thing. And if you take anything away from what I'm saying right now, it is vital for you to make sure that there is no bad blood on either side, that both sides feel fairly committed to working together. This is especially important if you are not working in the same company. If, let's say, there's two different companies working together, because they have no loyalty to each other. So it's important that the people that are actually talking to each other are really nice people that really interact well with each other. One thing that I've seen work really, really well is that you always have external communication go to the same person, so that there's always one contact person on each side. And these people you try to make friends from. You try to make them understand like that it's very important that they like each other, and like that this is a very natural and well-working social relationship. And you get that one part by making sure that each side is doing what they're expected to do, like on time, and that they have the right priorities and the right attitude, of course. But also by, as I said, minimizing that interconnection, because if the one team can work in isolation and do all the things that they're supposed to be doing, they feel like, oh yeah, we're autonomous, we're not being impacted or hindered by somebody else, we can take ownership, and the other team feels the same way. But if they both need to synchronize on basically a daily basis, oh, I write some code over here and I write some code over here, and shit, they didn't do it right, or they didn't do it right, and now I can't do my work, that causes just frustration. It causes a lot of churn and frustration on both sides, because they feel like they are getting in each other's way. So what I want you to take away from this is that, at least from my perspective, when it comes to working with two different teams or aligning them on a joint goal, or even if it's two different companies, the best way to do this is, number one, make the terms of engagement really, really clear. Ideally, they should have their contact area should be as small as possible, not socially, technically. In other words, the APIs between their different systems, if they're working on a different system, or God forbid that it's the same big code base, that needs to be, the surface area needs to be super, super small. They need to ideally never ever get into a situation where they have more than a few calls between their systems, as small as humanly possible, because that makes them more autonomous from each other, which is a very good thing. Socially, you want them to be aligned. You want them to be engaged in the same long-term vision, and they need to feel like they have a sensation of ownership. They need to feel like they are empowered to be part of discussions and so forth. So having a weekly check-in, or even a twice a week checking with each of the teams to make sure that everything's going well and that there's no bad blood. That's the most important thing. There cannot be bad blood between these two organizations or these two groups. If there is, the product might fall to shit very, very quickly. And just really remember that. it's really important that you, as the head of this entire thing, make sure that there is no friction between these two groups. And the best way to do this, as I said, is keep the technical contact surface very, very small, and you have final say on any type of topic that might be open for discussion or cause inter-team confusion and frustration, such as I said, documentation, or what the API thing is going to look like. You need to be an architect in that sort of scenario, where you just basically say that there is, because everybody knows, there is not really a best way to do this. So in order to avoid them fighting with each other over what term to use or what name to use and all that bullshit, just you go in and absorb all that potential frustration. Be the leader, be the person who says, all right, I know that we can do whatever here, but we're gonna do this. Because now they're angry at you. They're not angry at each other, and that's a lot better than them fighting with each other. If somebody has to be upset about something, let them be upset with you rather than with each other. Have a great day.